Hello and welcome to Practice Time with Ms. Rhona. My name is Rhona May Arca and I am a registered music teacher in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. For those of you who are tuning in for the first time, this is a series where I open up my practice room to the world. And sometimes it's just me working through some of my repertoire, what the students are working on, and sometimes I bring a bunch of my friends, just like today. So we've got 6 of my martial arts friends, and they all play musical instruments and also have other artistic pursuits. So welcome, everyone.
Hi, everyone. I'm Steve. I'm the guest from Edmonton, Alberta for this episode. I practice the martial art of Iaido, as a few others in the room also do. And my musical weapon of choice is the bass guitar.
Hi, I'm Jen. I'm from Ottawa, Ontario. And I practice 2 schools of swordsmanship, Japanese swordsmanship, Ha Kyu Shinkageryu and Katori Shintoryu. And I practice those with my sensei Erica, who's here, as well as Sensei Tong, who is actually located in a different city. So that's been very interesting. And I've been doing that for maybe 3 years. And my musical instrument of choice is the electric guitar. And I've been playing that in earnest for 2 years, but I've been on and off for a couple of years. And since the pandemic, it's really kickstarted me into playing the guitar again more seriously.
I have been practicing Iaido since the age of 14 and violin since the age of 10. And I am now 30.
Hi, I'm Erica. I'm from Ottawa, Ontario also. In regards to martial arts, I started probably about 10 years ago, and I started in different arts than I'm doing now. So now I lead my own study group in Koryu arts, so they're older from a long time ago, normally much smaller groups. So I practice Yagyu Shinkageryu, and as Jen said, also Katori Shinto-ryu, amongst some other Koryu that are also related. So in regards to music, I play taiko. So I practice Japanese drumming. I've been doing that for probably about 2.5 years, maybe. It's hard to keep track nowadays, given the time. I don't know when anything is anymore, it seems. So, but yeah, it's been a couple years. Yeah, and I guess that's about it. I've played some other instruments throughout my life, but not very seriously, and not for long amounts of time. So, thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ignacio Lorca from Santiago, Chile. I guess I'm the farthest one here on this meet. I'm currently a third dan in Iaido, Yodo, and Kendo that I've been practicing for 20 years now, I think. Quoting Jennifer on and off, interlaced with other pursuits. I play some guitar, some bass, and I've been playing mainly drums for the last 8 years, I would say, and failing miserably at learning the piano.
Hi, my name is Rayanne. I've been doing Iaido most recently, though I started my karate, my journey with karate in 2010. And I also am learning Yagyu Shinkageryu from Gal Sensei and Tong Sensei. I'm also in Ottawa. As far as music goes, I did a lot with cornet in my youth and trying to get my embouchure back. But lately I'm focusing on guitar because most of the music that I want to play is on guitar. So that's where I am.
As you can see, primary instrument is piano. Been playing the piano for, oh gosh, since I was 7.5. Sung in choirs growing up and wound up doing some conducting at university and then conducting for church choir. And doodle around with other instruments as well. So ukulele, the cajon. And as far as martial arts go, I've got my Nidan, or second degree, in Iaido and Jodo, and I also practice Hyoho Niten Ichiru and Kageru as well.
I'm one of the few that does the three arts from the Sanihon Kendo Renmei, the Kendo Yaido and Jodo. And I get asked about it, like, why all three? Most people just actually focus on one. But I like how they actually work together, and improving in one helps you with the others. Shioiri sensei, one of my first Yodo sensei, he used to say that your martial art pursuit was like a table. So you had three legs in his case. He also does Kendo, Yaido, and Yodo, so for example. And if you only work on one, your table will start tipping. So you need to work on all three of them to keep that surface steady. And at first, it felt just like the motivation part of it, to say, I have to stick with all three to improve and whatever. But in time, you start seeing why. So for example, I get a lot of my ma from Yodo, my distances, my timing. And Kendo gives you that feeling of actually being hit by someone. And that translates to Yaido, where you have to tell the story, you know? So having all three, and Yaido is where you actually cut. So you can take that cut to the other two. You can get the timing from Yodo to the other two, and the sense of realism from Kendo to the other two, and actually helps you make them all grow as a whole. And I find that very appealing, actually.
So I very much agree. I think that, so I also practiced all three when I was practicing those arts. And I honestly, I have to agree that I think they all complemented each other. And if you only focused on one, you would not be kind of complete in your understanding of the sword and weapons in general. I think that in the same context, cross-training in martial arts in general is very beneficial. Because again, I think that if you just stick to one, you kind of develop a box around you and your understanding of how things work, and it becomes tailored to just that specific art, when really there's all this other stuff outside of that box for you to learn that will really help you grow and understand the bigger concepts that kind of like this whole thing, this whole idea of the threads that run between everything, that kind of connect them. And you'll never learn that unless you do that cross training. And so I find it to be very valuable to do that.
So I've been doing music on and off for a long time, and martial arts relatively recently. I've done other martial arts before the current one, but it's only when I started practicing them both kind of more seriously and together that I realized there is a lot of commonality among the practices. And I saw one of your questions from one of your viewers asked if the movements that we go through in martial arts were if we think of them when we're performing or when we're practicing. And I would go to say personally, no. But what I think is actually common is the idea of training, repetition, the dedication. These kinds of things are common. So things like practicing a piece of music slowly at first to sort of learn, like with guitar, where your fingers go, kind of get the music in your fingers, so to speak. And you do the same thing with a new kata as well. You learn it slowly. You learn where your feet go, and you learn the choreography first. And once you sort of commit that to memory, that's when you can put in the finesse. So I would say both of that is the same between music and martial arts. You kind of get into the zone as well when you're doing a kata. If you do it really well, you can get into sort of a flow where you're almost like unconscious and you're executing it in the moment, and you're, especially with a partner, you're responding to the partner. And I feel the same is with music as well. As you can kind of get into a zone where you're not really thinking about where your fingers are going. You're just listening to the music, and you're experiencing the music as you play it. And I would say those are things that have come to mind right away as commonalities between the two.
I have a lot of thoughts in this section. Thinking like stances could be kind of like keys, you know, they provide different opportunities, which can also seem like you have challenges inflicted upon you. And what I mean by that is that some stances are painful physically, at least at first, until you get good at them. And the more sharps or flats in a key and changes between them, the more difficult the piece is to play. But achieving competence in both of these areas can be excellent for self-esteem. Technical proficiency only takes one so far in either, because they're both arts. You have to have this this other quality that affects the audience, or you have to bring your passion in order to really excel, especially in those kinds of arts that are more performative for martial arts. I was thinking that learning music is kind of like learning a new language, and learning a martial art is too, but like it's a physical language. And as far as like, since I'm working with guitar, I've noticed that you know, you can't have a death grip on your sword, but you can't have that on the neck of the guitar either. So you have to be able to slide up and down the guitar, and you won't get into the positions you need to be in as easily, because if you are too tight on the sword, then you can't move your wrists around and get into what you need to do to respond. I know back when I was doing karate, we learned things very broken down. Like we'd learn just how to step and punch, or just how to kick. And the way I'm learning guitar right now, a lot of it is like we'll learn a very simplified version of a chord, like maybe a one note or a 2-note power chord instead of the full thing. Power chords, actually, I've noticed that swordsmanship has helped me with, because my hand is stronger. The fretting hand is the left hand, which we use for the sword a lot. So the basic components, like stepping and punching and kicking and blocking, are like notes. The combinations matter, but also, you know, if you play a C in a C major scale, it'll sound different than maybe in a G major or an F sharp major. You might sound dissonant, and if you do the wrong move in martial art, you know, nothing might happen in a class, but if you're doing that out in the world, you could die.
If I may say that got deep very fast.
Sorry. I'll be Canadian and apologize for my...
It is cool though. It is cool though.
Yeah, for sure. Steve or Joe, anything to add?
I'm just agreeing with the points that were brought up previously, because yeah, those are a lot of the common threads that I've picked up on as well. In my case specifically, the focus on a repetition, a slower, more methodical practice for both music and martial arts. And I find that over the last year, especially the way this past year has gone, slowing things down and taking that more methodical, detailed approach, I find quite comforting. It satisfies my inner control freak by allowing me to exert, you know, a level of control over both types of practice, my Iaido practice and my musical practice, without reverting to bad habits such as exerting control through a tight grip that doesn't work. But by slowing things down, I feel more in control of the direction and flow of the practice.
Well, the thing about this topic is there's so many things to talk about, because I think there are so many connections to be made on so many different levels. So On the one hand, I think one of the most obvious things that they share in common is the kind of educational structure in which you start off by learning basics through rote memorization and practicing them relentlessly without too much higher thought until it's, you don't even have to think about it anymore. It's just automatic. And then once those elements, those basics are automatic, then you can start to work with more complex things, pieces, certain kata, perhaps. You eventually have to get to a point where you have to transcend technique and then finally find a voice and find a way that to interpret what you're dealing, whether it's the kata or the piece, in a way that's vital, that's alive, whatever that means. So there's plenty that's similar there. There's plenty of other conceptual sorts of things that are similar. Rhythm is important in both music and martial arts. In the case of both, you have to be able to detect rhythm and understand rhythm in the people around you and be able to work with it, whether it be matching it, whether it be working against it. For example, maybe you're playing a piece of music that has like compound meters, so you really can't listen to what other people are doing or you'll get hopelessly lost. So you have to then just focus in on your own work. I mean, I could go on and on and on, but gosh, there's so many things. There's so many things that they share in common. And I should say that at the very least that while I haven't pursued this line that much in my own research yet when it comes to the musical connections in Japanese culture to other art forms. I do know for a fact that music had an influence on martial arts in the West, courtesy of a little, I don't have the text, unfortunately, but this little example that was obvious was Louis XIV justifying the elevation of dance in the country above other things as being a supreme sort of art form, not just because he was good at it, but also because, at least the justification that he used, was that it was something that would help prepare people for the demands of military service and work. So there was a connection there between, even in that place, between martial arts and dance and of course music. So yeah, there are a lot of connections to be explored, many. I think it should be obvious to anybody who's seen a martial arts demo with a taiko drum in the background that there's something going on there. Musashi in the Book of Five Rings speaks specifically about rhythm.
Rhythm
So
timing.
that connection is crystal clear in text. So it's very useful to look at that. And I think he talks about it in the Earth chapter,
I think so.
in his fundamentals. So you can see how important then it is. If that's something that he brings up in the Earth chapter, the very first one of the book that is called Earth, at least in part, because it's dealing with the fundamentals of his system, it just goes to show how important it is. And obviously it is, because if you think about strategy is ultimately about disrupting your opponent against their expectations. And so you have to be able to detect a pattern in their behavior and respond to it, whether you match it, whether you work against it, whether you break it. And he makes, actually, I think one of the things that makes that book so much easier to understand, actually, is if you do think about it in the context of a large scale, which he frequently talks about. So it's not just about individuals fighting each other with swords. He constantly talks about, okay, take this principle and now apply it to the battlefield. And it's much easier actually to think about in the context of the battlefield, because it's actually slower if you look at it from, I guess, a bird's eye perspective, really. If you're playing like an RTS or something like that, that kind of a video game, right? You can see your armies and they're moving, fairly slowly and in a fairly predictable pattern, right? And so you have to be able to move your troops in such a way to take advantage of the terrain, of the opponent's movement. It's easier, at least on a large scale, that way, because it works slower and it's a little bit less subtle and psychological in an obvious sense, even though the psychological element is important with large forces, because you're dealing with fear and battles joined, people fight, gets to a point where one side thinks it's going to lose, and then everybody runs away, and then the rout happens. So there's an obvious sort of psychological arc to it as well.
Following up on that, there's I believe all of us do Iaido in some form.
Yep.
The concept of Ha Kyu, that is also seen in theater a lot, no theater, and you see it on film for sure, and you would want to see it on music as well, because if you have a piece that is always fast, always intense, it gets boring. Also with a kata, you see someone flying through a kata and it's like, okay, that was impressive, but I don't really get the story. So having this part that engages you, and then having something that's kind of building up, and then having a resolution, we could say that's also a common thread that moves between the kata and martial arts and music and film and writing and having a conversation.
Actually, Nacho, your shirt is reminding me of my favorite examples of musical Ha Kyu. Anesthesia, Call of Cthulhu, and Orion. Metallica's three big instrumental pieces, and how the music actually builds and ebbs and flows and builds and ebbs and flows through each song, and they're masterpieces because they're not boring. It's not speed metal all the way through. It's just good music, because it's basically taking you with them on this auditory journey, right?
Yeah It's telling a story, and when we do kata, we have to tell a story. Otherwise it's just flailing around.
And it's the same thing with when you're writing fiction too. I mean, you can't just jump straight to the ending unless you're starting with the ending and then building backwards to tell the rest of the story. But in standard linear prose, you build to the action, you build to the climax, you build to the end scene, you build to the character development. And we hear it in kata, we can see it when done properly, and you're not panicking and rushing your way through it and you're grading.
I'm just thinking about like the sonata cycle, for instance, because there's 3, sometimes 4 movements, but there's also Ha Kyu there, because there's a slow movement, there's the fast movement, there's a medium movement, or that first movement, you've got your 2 characters or your 2 themes introduced, and then there's conflict, and then there's resolution. So even structurally, there's commonalities.
Can I throw an idea bomb in there?
Go for it.
Yeah. Why is it important that the kata is interesting? Why does it have to tell a story? Why does a piece of music have to tell a story? Why can't it just be played well? Like perfectly in tune, meter is perfect.
So my thoughts on that is that you have to somehow engage the observer.
Yeah.
And that doesn't happen if everything's just perfect, you know. So you have to somehow pique their interest, and that is often done with like ebbs and flows in tempo, speed. You know, it's the same thing as kind of like throwing in opposing characters into a story, right? Like if every character was exactly the same, you'd lose interest. You have to have people kind of feeding off each other, and you know, to be able to add that interest. That's what kind of engages people, right? It's that kind of that's my thoughts anyways, is it engages the observer. Yeah.
What does it mean to be perfect? If you're technically perfect, you're executing every single note as it's written on the page. Is that what you mean by technically perfect? And I would say it's possible that what's written on the page doesn't perfectly capture the music in the mind of the person who wrote it. So that's where the interpretation and the engagement come from, is that there's more than what is just on the page. And if you hear a technically perfect piece, that's basically a computer reading the music and producing the sounds, and that doesn't sound very good.
Yeah.
So I would rather listen to music that's imperfectly played by a person who's putting their own interpretation on it and doing something to engage the audience than one just like played by a computer reading the music.
So did Beethoven. Beethoven said that he didn't care if they made mistakes technically or with intonation. He cared principally about the passion with which they interpreted his music. So yeah,
and
totally.
Yeah.
that goes with my thought on this one. With when you're hearing a technically perfect piece of music, you're just hearing it. When you're seeing somebody do a kata in all the correct steps, you're just looking at it. When properly engaged with it, it's more like you're feeling and experiencing what the artist is bringing to the table, right? So in that respect, yeah, it's great if you're technically proficient, but can the audience truly engage and feel what you're presenting?
Why is it important to engage the audience in martial arts? In music, it's obviously for pleasure and for entertainment. But why is that important in martial arts?
I have a counter question there, because there's one common thread on all the things we're discussing, is that we're referring to all of those as arts and artists. So how do you define an art? Because is a musician a different kind of artist than a martial artist?
Oh, okay. I could really go down the rabbit hole on that topic, because you then have to deal with the problem with the notion of what is considered art, and then you end up being split between, well, art in a sense of, oh, that's a work of art. So in a sense of giving something status versus versus the categorical definition of that is a art piece, so to speak. So I would say absolutely there is completely a difference between a martial artist and other artists, but it kind of depends on what the medium is. Because to some extent, martial artists are interpreters. They're not so much inventors. Unless you want to think about it perhaps in the context that invention occurs in the moment of conflict, which actually would be fair if you think about a particular, some musical traditions in which there's the music on the page and there's your technique. But when it comes to the actual moment of performance, that's when you kind of do your own thing, jazz, Baroque music, that level of improvisation. And what's amazing about that is the whole reason it's important is because that's the temporally relevant factor. So you adjust your improvisations and your the way that you interpret the music should be ideally directly related to the audience who is listening, because you are playing to them, because you want them to be responding to what you're doing. So what you're doing in that moment is for your audience. And I suppose there is a similarity there in conflict, between you and an opponent.
And even the people watching, because when we go to a seminar, you have all these different exponents of the art, and you look around and you find the ones that spark something with their performance, you know, and you can relate, and they're fighting, but they're telling a story, and it's like, I like how they do them. Why? Sometimes you don't even know. It could be because it looks real, or the way they flow when they move, but you capture that, and that holds you there. And there's all these other partners doing the same thing, but you get fixated there. And then you are at a concert and you have a band playing, and beyond the instruments that you might like, because you play bass and you look at the bass player, but then there's this band, it's a collective called Postmodern Jukebox. I don't know if you know them. They do a lot of covers and stuff. And there's tambourine guy, Tim Kubart, and he plays the tambourine with such joy. And that just draws you to him, and it's like, he's having a blast. You can see it, you can feel it. And it happens in music, it happens in martial arts, it happens when someone puts words to a page, and you either relate or don't relate. It sparks an emotion or not. And I think that at the end of the day, we could boil art down to that. You know?
Yeah, and I think like coming back to what Steve said earlier, I think that's exactly it. I think it makes you feel something, right? Mm-hmm. So whether that feeling is like excitement, whether it's awe, whether it's, you know, some kind of peace, I don't know. It could be anything, but it's making you feel something, right? And I think that is what gets us engaged, what sets something apart. Like you were saying, like in a room of a seminar of people doing the same art, it's like you get drawn to certain pairs, right? And what is that? It's because something in that is capturing you and making you feel something from their performance of it, right? And it's the same in music. It resonates with you if it makes you feel something, right?
Sorry, I wanted to defend my part about telling the story, why that was important.
I was going to say I defend that too, because I think as well on that point that why is it important to tell a story in martial arts? We already know why it's important in music, but a lot of the this art is keeping it alive. It's like a living history, right? It's a living practice. Yeah, sure, there's some books on it, but you really can't appreciate it until you've seen it performed. And why you need to tell a story is because that you're engaging with the history, and you as a person are producing the history, you're interacting with the history, and you are contributing to the history. And so is anyone who watches it and who, as a result of watching you, wants to take part as well. So that's why I think telling a story is important, and giving life to it is important. It's the whole reason why we do it, I think, is to keep it alive and to breathe life into it.
I have an aspect on story that hasn't been talked about. Humans have been using story to communicate since we could figure a way to communicate. I mean, what do you think cave drawings are about? You know, their stories of important hunts, perhaps. Maybe we don't understand the full context of what those stories were at the time, but they felt it important enough to try and leave a legacy of it. And I think we do that with music, with paintings, with writing, with martial arts.
Yeah, and with whichever art you follow or anything you pursue, if you do it, it means that it meant something to you. And I guess that translates. If someone saw it fitting to create a martial arts school of swordmanship, that drive lives in that school. And it might not be for everyone, but those who can relate to it will keep that drive going forward. And the same with music, literature.
It's something that I'm curious about in telling the story. To what extent is that aesthetics? So to what extent is that it looking or having a kind of beauty that suits a particular type of story that you're trying to convey? So I throw that out there because the caution that comes to my mind is to at what point does doing kata become performance art disassociated from teaching waza, from teaching martial arts techniques? So that's what I'm interested in, is finding, like, you know, at least with this particular subject, is where are we on that spectrum then? When have we drifted too far away?
You said it yourself, Joe. It relates to the audience. You know, so XMA. When I see these kids jumping around and flinging swords, it's like, okay, that's technically impressive. Could I do that? No, I couldn't do that. Did I find it interesting? Yes. Is it practical? I don't know. I don't know how practical it is, but there are they're gaining a lot of the same abilities that we are through more serious practice, you know, and I changed the tone, serious practice, because they have the determination, they are constant in their practice, and they are able to pursue something to a certain skill level. So then you have I'm going to use kendo for this example, because you have the sport competitive kendo, that they like to win tournaments, and they do this very fast lighting kote, and it's tournament kendo. And you go to a grading with that kendo, and you will fail. And you have the people that never do kendo no kata, and they only do it before the grading. And I really like kendo no kata. It's the part of kendo that I like the most, I think. And Yodo and kendo no kata, they're pretty close, you know. And so then you have your audience, and you can have someone look at a shiai and say, I don't get it. What are they doing? They're just screaming and there's nothing there. And that might seem empty if you don't have enough knowledge, you know. But a kendo no kata presentation might be more accessible for an audience that knows little about it, but they say, okay, he's attacking, he's defending. You can kind of translate that. And then it's also what you want to get out of it. Because again, like you said, you have this, the written music or the written kata, and you have the people that are interpreting this kata. So what's the original bit there? How they do it at a certain time. And for some, that feeling of this is real might be what they're looking for. And you're cut in Jaido and you're thinking, okay, I'm going through bone here. And if you convey that and you teach your students that, but now you have to go through the collarbone, and that's hard. So you're supposed to apply pressure at that point. That's not really nice. Going back to the aesthetics bit, you know? But when you know enough and you see it done properly, you say, ooh, nice. Because you can see that cut going through, you know? So it goes back to the audience and the expectation and what you're getting out of it.
But I have to say, though, that's a hypothetical, right? So that's, you are demonstrating a hypothetical concept about, oh, you know, you have to cut this way in order to cut through bone. So I have to show that to these people. And without having done so, hopefully. I hope you haven't been cutting people through the bone. But, you know, so it's, my only point is simply, it's just that, you know, we're trying to, if we're thinking about interpreting, you know, the kata in a particular type of way, we have to be careful about not getting caught up in aesthetics, because aesthetics are personal thing, I think aesthetics do in fact hint at something deeper about the nature of reality. It's a very ancient idea. It's actually basically the idea of anybody who is religious, even though I'm not religious, but religious people tend to think that there is a kind of beautiful order to the universe, right? So to me, there is a sense that aesthetic can actually hint towards truth. That's what I think, that ultimately, whether you believe in religion or not, I think it is based on an idea that there is truth to be had in the understanding of art. But that's not quite the same thing as martial arts when you think about what they're for, the martial part of them, right? That's what that's what I want to highlight, I guess, is that there's plenty of times where I think the art part has started to expand to the extent that it might start to squeeze out the martial part, and that we are instead then play acting stories based on fantasy, because we are just reenacting things that we've heard being passed down or from books or culture, whatever, and then pretending that it's reflective of what reality is. And if it seems that way for people, then it works. But I mean, art is supposed to feel real. That's the whole point, even when it's not obviously real, like kabuki, which is hyper stylized, for instance.
Yeah, but two things there, and I'm gonna try not to hog the conversation. It's gonna be just Joe and me talking. The martial arts that we practice are anachronic, I believe is the term. Like you wouldn't expect to use them in real life anymore. So there's already a disconnection there. And even if you thought about them as being alive today, that you walk around with a sword and you would engage in combat with someone, kata is still fantasy, because it's just a keyhole delivery system. So it's just getting you ready to eventually survive. And that's going to be a moment where a lot of all these other questions are going to be important, like the nerves before a performance and all that. If you go to battle and you have all this kata in you, but you've never been to battle, so what's going to happen to you at the sight of blood, you know? So whenever we're training, we're engaging in that fantasy, I guess. I don't know if I'm conveying the meaning that I'm intending you, because it kind of gets lost to the music side. Because when you're training, you're actually playing the piece of music, and then that's what you intend to communicate. But you have to kind of go into suspension of disbelief and understand the context of what you're looking at, being martial arts or whatever. Because at some point, even more combat-oriented martial arts, they train you to fight against an opponent that does the same thing as you do, and it's not really trying to kill you. Even if you do taekwondo, there's still that element of fantasy in a way, because it's not going to be to the death, you know, MMA or whatever. So there has to be that element of suspension of disbelief to actually appreciate where it comes from. But I do agree with you that if we go solely on aesthetics and we pervert the aesthetics, it loses meaning. So I do see your point, but I kind of mean, what I mean with all this is that the aesthetics, they don't really have to be pleasant all the time. And that would be the right aesthetic for it. I remember when I taught Jaido and Yodo class at a university, and you had the medicine students rejoicing on the descriptions that were gruesome for the literature majors or whatever, you know? And then again, audience, context, it depends on so many things. Not everything's for everyone.
And some of us literature majors were like, ooh, blood and gore, what's going on? But, you know, that might have just been me.
I think if you thought aesthetics had no value, you probably would be drawn to practical arts like mixed martial arts and like serious combat training, and using modern weapons like guns. So I think for sure there's an element of aesthetics and fantasy that we are drawn to when we practice these arts. I don't know if there's a parallel for music, except that we probably are engaging in a fantasy when we listen to the music. What we are trying to convey, inspires us and inspires our imaginations. But on the note of aesthetics, that there's a lot in there. But I think it's fair to say that there is a lot of aesthetics in the art that we do, but I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that traditionally that was there. I can say that from seeing how the various styles are contrasted with each other, and when they originated, and the different aesthetics present in them reflected the time period in which they originated. And so that's hardly a modern thing, and that's hardly unique to us as modern practitioners. And I think that's always been part of these arts. So
I also think that what we should be looking for is that balance point between form and function, where the aesthetics and the functionality of what we're doing meet in the middle, and then all of a sudden that's when we hit peak functional aesthetic, where the audience watching us sees what we're doing and goes, oh, that makes perfect sense. I can see where that cut would go. I can see why he's using that particular posture. It makes sense because the form is correct, which allows the aesthetic to be present and appreciated, not necessarily to, those of us in the know, but also to a greater audience as well.
Mm-hmm.
I think aesthetically, when talking about music, there are a lot of artists out there that their image is very important. So I think you can see it that way. But as far as the martial side, I mean, it's not just about execution. It's not about, killing someone with a sword. It's about, strategizing with your mind, learning to problem solve and things like that. And that, I don't think that's going to go away. I do think as a, when you're at a more junior level, you really aren't thinking about that stuff unless you've done a lot of martial arts before that. You're just trying to, get the dance steps and whatnot, and just doing what you're told. But eventually, you get to this level where you're talking about it and you're debating whether or not it's better to slice there versus there, or
I heard from my sensei, and you probably all heard a variation of this at some point. In Jaido, it's not just about killing your opponent. It's about making his friends not want to kill you. So the story bit is like the confidence with which you move prevents retaliation from happening.
Your legacy.
So that also plays a part, and would have played a part, I think, back in the day, in a way, if you had a confrontation one-on-one and you decimated the other guy, people would question if they would challenge you. If you looked like you were struggling, they would probably be more confident. And it goes to Steve's point, because I think the form and function in this performance arts kind of has a sweet spot that we all strive for.
Yeah, for sure. I'm thinking about how that connects musically, and it does come back to Steve's point about that balance of form and function, because, there's I've seen lots of performers where they're engaging because they're moving a lot, but the thing is, it's distracting you from the performance. So a lot of what I was taught was, how you move has to match the story that you're telling. So
Glenn
if it's an
Gould
aggressive
humming?
piece. What's that?
Glenn Gould humming?
Yeah. Oh, drives me nuts every time I listen to him. Any of his recordings. But And I've got a student learning a piece that's supposed to be very robotic. So I said, yeah, don't make that look pretty at all. That needs to match that story. So yeah, it's a balance of form and function, because on the other hand, he needs to look mechanical, but he can't lock up, because then you can't play properly.
I had that experience playing a Steve Reich piece in university. The chamber ensemble, we played Steve Reich's Octet, which is it's just great. And yeah, I'd never played a minimalist piece like that before, so I had to completely rethink how I played my violin. I had to play it mechanically on purpose, and while understanding that that was exactly what I needed to do for that piece of music, which is not anything I've ever really done before. I've only ever played mechanically because I was figuring out technique or playing a study or a scale or something, and not interpreting a piece. But in that example, it was like, no, you actually, for this music to work, you do have to play it kind of like a machine. And if I'm going to play it like a machine, then I have to think about my technique in response to that, so that I can be just on time and have the most even tone possible, and make sure that the note starts exactly when it needs to with my stand partner and ends precisely at the same time. And yeah, that's freaking hard, man. But I think maybe part of the beauty of that piece of music, and in a lot of minimalism, I think, is when you take those kind of highly structured approaches to instruments that are not so obviously, don't so easily inspire in the mind a kind of mechanistic kind of music. String instruments being instruments that people typically associate with, something that's a little bit more dynamic than more sort of pattern-based, rhythmic-based, repetitive cell structure kind of music. So then when you use those instruments in this different kind of paradigm, it creates a pretty amazing atmosphere.
I think that actually goes to highlight that point about form and function, because what you had to do is you had to modify, your technique, your function of playing to meet the form requirements of the piece. So we have, in my opinion, a fantastic example right there.
Yeah. There you go. Yeah. And it would have been wrong to play that piece like playing Mozart or something, or that's a completely different paradigm, and it wouldn't have worked. That's like why the early music movement happened, is because people kept playing Baroque music like it was 19th century music, and it didn't really work. Or at least people who knew better, at least in that realm, academics, knew that this wasn't really how this music was played, and there was something obviously lost in that. I mean, I just think, praise to Carl Richter. I think he did a lot of great stuff, but you listen to his Bach recordings, right? And you've got huge orchestras, and like the Brandenburg concertos, all these, everybody's upright in their suits, and the bum bum ba ba bum ba ba bum 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 ba ba bum ba ba bum bum bum, and everything is just bum bum. It's all just like loud and forward, and as if the music is nothing more than the printed dots on that page, and that there's nothing else to it, because there weren't the kind of editorial markings that came in later eras, so people played it flat if it wasn't something highly edited, and the effect is just so robotic and create the completely wrong image of that music, as if Bach was some kind of like the evil Lutheran school teacher with his rolled up piece of music that he'd bang on the music stand, screaming at the choir of the boys' choir, who wouldn't pay attention or too busy, fucking around in the back of the pews and going like, focus, this is how we have to sing this incredibly, excessively complex chorus that I've written for you. And it's so obvious. Like, if you look at any of his music, you understand the depth of which that man explored the art form, which is deeper than anybody. And you know that that's not what he'd want. And it's not even like, you look at his scores, his autograph manuscript, the arabesques of which he writes with his quill, and it's beautiful and flowing. And in what way does that suggest bam 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 bam? Dreadful. And then when people figured out how to play it differently, boom, explosion of interest in this music. Like, no shit. When you play right, people like it.
I'm gonna try to segue this to our origin stories, seeing the comments that are appearing with the questions. But I do have one thing to add before that. I don't know, I'm sure Steve saw this. There's this band that plays Motorhead songs, but they're all robots.
Yep.
And it goes back to the playing perfectly and all that, you know. So it kind of relates to your later example. They look like metalheads. They're literally metalheads, and they headbang. So even though everything is perfect and is precise and it's a robot playing music, it feels different because there's this bit of performance added to it.
Yep.
It's not just the MIDI file playing from speakers. You see this thing that it's moving arms and it's playing drums with 6 arms, and the guitar is banging his head. But the point that I wanted to make is trying to go the difference between the story we're telling and the journey we're following, because when you get to the point where you can perform these pieces like they need to be performed, it means you are at that point on your journey that allows you to tell that story. But sometimes you're doing kata with a new student and you can't use that performance because you're gonna lose him. You know, he's gonna be frustrated. He can't follow you. You know, and it goes to something that Victor Wooten said, and someone mentioned here that learn music as a language, and learn martial arts as a language. And no one criticizes an adult that's baby talking because they understand the context. He's helping the baby develop his language, and same thing should be with music, and we do it with martial arts. And you have someone new in front of you, and you don't dumb down. You perform to the level they can perform. You're using the skill that's required in the context that you're performing. And that should segue to our origin stories. The why the martial arts and musical instruments, and not just the what we're doing now. Because we were all that newbie at some point, and we stuck around for some reason.
Pub nights.
The swords are cool.
Well, for
It's
many
a valid
of us
reason.
and musical instruments, it's because our parents forced us to do it. Though not mine, but for many of us.
But do you still play after leaving home?
Yes.
There was no music at my house growing up. No, my grandma listened to some things now and then, but there was not a music background. And I wish I had it. When you hear the stories, you know, like my parents bought me a guitar when I was 8. I was like, oh. You know, it's having that access, and it's probably what we would do if we had kids. You know, there would be swords and guitars, and they would be exposed to that, and the balance would be giving them the opportunity to experience those things and then decide if they want to pursue further. You know,
I was just thinking now of like Lone Wolf and Cub. I just an image flash into mind of like Ogami Ito with poor Daigoro sitting there in his swaddling clothes, and he has to choose between, I don't know, the piano and the sword.
I think here it's important to just mention none of us condone children having swords, okay?
At least not sharp ones.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. It can be a bowken.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Or the most underrated martial arts weapon that I think has been so frequently mentioned and nobody ever takes seriously. And I'm thinking, come on, if they're all saying it, maybe you should give it a try. The rolled up piece of newspaper. How many a Japanese sensei has said, rolled up piece of newspaper, practice suburi with that. And people go, I'm not going to do that. I don't know. I think
It works.
I think there's some foolishness there, yeah. One example of an artist that I'll bring up that I like to recommend to people as a source of inspiration is the filmmaker David Lynch. And the reason for that is because he managed, against all odds, to eke out just enough of a living in the mainstream media without compromising his artistic vision, except in one example, Dune, which he's happy to talk about, and but otherwise, the man has stuck to his guns, and not just that, but he's also a remarkably free artist, in the sense that his world, the world that he creates in his work, is not one that is in any obvious sense drawn from anything else except his own brain. And it's, to me, very inspiring, because it's an example of somebody who has created a particular style, a particular language that's uniquely his, and yet manages to convey much to a public, but also the extent to which he has managed to do his own thing without ultimately sacrificing his artistic integrity completely, and just saying, okay, whatever, I'll make whatever garbage people pay me to make. And as a result, it's been of, well, at the very least, the utmost pleasure to us fans of his stuff, because it's so authentically the work of an artist. And even if other people don't necessarily get it or go like, what the F is this? That's fine. It's because he's trusting his own instinct against all else, whatever it is, whatever is going on in the rest of the world. And I think that's really, really admirable. And I love that. I love that there are still artists like that who don't give a shit at all what anybody has to say, and just do their work without listening to anybody saying, you should do this, you should do this. Oh, are you sure that's the right thing to do? Oh, don't you think that might be, don't you think that could be better, or that could be different? And they just go, no, I stay true to my heart. So that's why I admire him in particular. And he works in multiple mediums. So it's not just like a filmmaker. He's also a painter, and he was principally a painter through his training anyways. So it's also taking that creative mindset and applying it to multiple arts. And I think being fairly successful in each of them. Miyamoto Musashi.
Of course.
Yeah. If no one's going to say it, I will. Obviously, that guy. And for me, I don't care if he won 60 duels. I don't. He wrote the Book of Five Rings, and he, of course, created the Nisanichi Ryu, and he did the scroll painting of the Shrike on the dead tree. And for me, that's all I need to know. One guy did those three things, no question. That is somebody to learn from.
Yeah, I personally resonate more with the Dokudo of Musashi.
Mm.
I don't know if you read it. Yeah, it's
Yes.
kind of even a bit more than the Book of Five Rings, because it feels more contemporary in a way. But to answer the question directly, like an inspiration, it might be a bit more shallow than Joe's. It's this guy, Adam Savage. He, I guess, is what you would call a pop culture icon at this point in life. But I particularly like one quote from him that is, he defines himself as a serial skill collector.
Mm.
And I think that that's something that answers some previous questions as well. It's like why we do these things, because we need to.
Mm.
You know, why you want to learn one instrument and then another one and then a martial art and then another martial art? That's hard to put into words. How do you describe that feeling? It's like a hunger in a way, and it brings satisfaction that you can dive deep enough. I'm gonna quote my sensei, my Yaido sensei, and you bring up some pearls with you. You went deep enough to find some pearls that you can share or you can keep, but you got something out of it. It was not an empty exercise. And that satisfies your need, and until you find another pool, you know, to dive into. It's kind of the feeling of being a generalist in a society that's full of experts. It's very satisfying. Makes life feel more rich in a way. And yeah, I like the way he presents himself. I don't know who he really is, but I like the character that he sells us. Yeah.
So for me, when it comes to people that inspire me, this is going to be kind of esoteric in a way. It's not necessarily individual people. It's something that comes across through people. And that can vary. Like, it could be different people at different times. But in all the arts I do, the thing that really inspires me is when I see joy. It's like when I see some expression of joy come out in what they are doing. So like in martial arts, you don't see that very often. And in my opinion, I don't see that very often. But when I do, I am completely inspired by it, and it resonates with me, and it kind of it excites me, you know, like it gives me motivation. And I think this is actually one of the reasons that drew me to my current sensei, which is Tong Sensei, where he just has this enthusiasm for everything he's teaching, you know, and joy comes out throughout that, you know, like he can enjoy it. He's not afraid to show that he is enjoying the experience, right? It's the same with music. So there's a couple of taiko players that, you know, whenever I see them perform, I'm just like enamored by them. And like one of them was one of my teachers here in Ottawa. Her name was Eureka. And another one is from the performing group Kadon, and another woman, amazingly, her name is Kaoli Asano. And she's very dynamic, and same with my teacher here in Ottawa, where they're both very dynamic, and they both just exude this joy in their performance, where they just get fully involved and taken away by it, you know. And it's mesmerizing to watch. And so sometimes I find you know, it can be somebody in my own group where it's just all of a sudden it's like something's resonating with them, and you can just see this kind of joy in like their expression of whatever it is they're doing, you know, whether it's like that kind of aha moment you have, and it's just like this wonder where they're just like, oh my God, you know, and it's so exciting in that moment. And it's those moments, that feeling that keeps me inspired. So it's like I see it throughout all these different people at different times. It's not kind of specific people per se. It's just that expression of joy that comes out in their art, you know, and I think that is what keeps me inspired.
I have to say I have a similar sort of relationship with inspiration, and it's not, I don't think I could name a single person that has like consistently inspired me throughout my whole life where I'm like, I have to be like this person, like, and I'm going to follow everything. It's sort of like kind of, there are different moments in time and different people. And I think what it boils down to is they're passionate and they're doing something different. They're doing something I haven't seen before. And I am kind of captivated by it. It seems like magic or whatever. And so then I have to know what that is. And I was thinking about like why I got back into guitar after so long of not playing it. And it was because I found a random woman playing Moonlight Sonata's third movement on electric guitar on YouTube. And she is just like incredible. And she has like 5 videos and she's disappeared. Like she's just there for these videos, boom, crazy technical piece, and then done. And I was just like, this is crazy. Like this lady's crazy. And that was it. That was it. I can't remember her name. I think it's like Tina or something. And that like got me back into it. And it's always moments like that where there's some kind of like spark that ignites my interest, and I have to pursue it. With martial arts, I think it was Star Wars. Cheesy as it is.
Ain't that great?
The guitar version is just insane. It's amazing.
Oh, totally. It's so metal. It's that's one of those amazing classical music moments that's like like the metal. You know, you want to turn metal people onto classical music, you go this, you know. And I don't know, like, you know, Storm from the Four Seasons or something for
yeah, Vivaldi works.
Yeah, you know, it's like, hey, yeah, totally. Now that's playing through my head. I love it so much. I totally get it. It's amazing.
Do you ever find yourself expressing that joy in martial arts in a similar way that you do when you're playing music?
That's a really good question. I would fear that the answer for that would be no at this point. And the only reason I can say that I think the answer is no is because I think I am still at a point where I get too wrapped up in trying to perform something properly that I can't just get completely involved in the moment and have my emotions expressed sort of fully through what it is I'm doing. I hope to one day I can, but I don't know that I can do that at this point. Maybe that's why it inspires me so much, to see if I can see that in somebody else, you know.
It's definitely easier for me to get in the zone and feel that joy with music, just because, I mean, I've been doing it for so long. I need to get out of my head when I'm doing embu. I'm still trying, like Erica, just trying to think things through and trying to get everything right. But there's been, I think it was one Calgary Expo embu where I got glimmers of, oh wow, this is great. This feels great. This is the most relaxed I've ever been, and I'm getting into it, but I haven't felt that since.
I think that was the Calgary Expo where I was also doing the photos for you guys as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there are a couple of pictures from that photo set that where you can actually see it, especially when you're playing off against Elena, where the two of you are just in the moment and having fun with it, and it's like the greatest thing ever.
Oh yeah, like the Kurai when we were charging at each other for Dei, like that was just thrilling. Yeah.
And I love how it came across when it came across in the photos too, because you know you could actually see the investment from both of you in that moment, right?
Well, I'm way more relaxed and okay with doing martial arts than I am with playing the violin. I'm an absolute wreck when I play the violin because I'm not very good at it. So all I do is just think, oh, I'm terrible. And I have to play for an extended period of time to not think that I'm completely terrible. So, but I'm an amateur. I'm not like a conservatory student or anything like that. So there's a level that I haven't been able to breach for whatever reasons. So that's fine. And I'm glad, at least in martial arts, I'm not as much of a neurotic mess as I am when I'm trying to perform a piece of music. But ultimately, at the end of the day, my relationship with music is not really so much through the violin, because I know in my head, I know what I want to be doing. I know what it should sound like. It's all up here, but I can't make the hands do it. So in a weird way, the hands don't even have to do it sometimes, and I can just, I don't know, I can just enjoy the abstract idea of it almost.
I would say for me, yes, the feelings are similar in the sense that there are times where I can't play something that I want to play and it's really frustrating. And I practice it over and over and over again, and I'm not connecting with it, and I just want to throw my guitar across the room. And the same thing in martial arts too. You just always don't put your foot in the right spot. Like no matter what, you're like, okay, this time I'm only going to think about my feet, and then you just don't. And you just get like super frustrated. And then there are times where you're just, doing a kata and you're like, yeah, that felt good. That was excellent. Yeah, that was awesome. And for music too, sometimes you're playing a piece and you're like, yeah, I really nailed it that time. So it kind of comes and goes. And I think those kind of feelings of like, really connecting and really feeling triumphant and really relating to it are there in both martial arts and music. And at the same time, the frustrations kind of are there as well sometimes.
Yeah. I've even had those moments still too, when you are playing, maybe even just for yourself in your room or something, and you haven't realized that you've kind of gotten lost in it. And then you come back to where you are and you're like, whoa, that was... I know that wasn't like, I know Paganini, if he was standing here, would go like, yeah, but knowing me and what I can do, that's something that's really, there was whatever happened there, whatever it was something that was kind of beautiful, because it was somehow the best expression of what I could do at that moment.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be complicated. It just has to be something that sounds good or that you know how to do and that you are just doing it. It could be something very, very simple, but if you can do it and feel it instead of just think, I have to put my fingers here, here, and here, and then I have to strum with my right hand with a certain rhythm. If you just do it, and that's a cool feeling. Like, and you can get that in both of them, I think. Yeah, both martial arts and in music.
Yeah. Actually, I've been feeling that way with some of my cuts lately, where, whatever form it is, you'll just do a few cuts and you go, ooh, oh, yeah, that was...
When you get the swoosh on the Kesa cut, you're like, yeah.
Yeah, and then, exactly. You got that, and it's the hostage is perfect, and it ends precisely where it needs to, and are just like, hell yeah, I got this. Yeah. It's good. It's a wonderful feeling.
But I think that's the difference, right? Is that like there's a difference between feeling satisfied, right? Which I think is a common thing for us to feel, like more common, right? Within like martial arts or something. It's that feeling of like, yes, I did that right, or yes, that felt right, that felt good, right? But then there's like joy, I find, is different. Like, I don't know. And maybe it's just because I was raised in an atmosphere in martial arts where we weren't allowed to feel joy, right? It wasn't allowed to be expressed. It was not allowed to be felt, And so maybe I have somehow developed a disconnect in the relation of martial arts and being able to feel like I can express that feeling of joy, right? And so maybe it's a little bit harder for me to attain. And but I do feel there's a certain magic attached to it when you can see it displayed by a martial artist, because it's so rare. Like it's so rare to be able to see that feeling conveyed, you know.
When I'm doing gyro or I'm taking pictures or woodworking, it's very personal. So it's that just the zone. I don't think I've ever found myself smiling, you know, after finishing a piece of furniture. But I have found myself smiling and talking when performing music or doing kata. Like you receive a very good kuritsuke, and I mean like, whoa, and you continue doing kata, and it's like, oh, that was good. And you actually talk to your partner because you're training. Or when you're playing with someone and you nail the change to the chorus and you look at the guitar player, it's like, oh, see, that was good, you know? And I think that's closer to what Erika was saying, that doesn't have to be that obvious, but but there is an expression that for me is easier when I'm actually with someone else doing these things, you know, where I can share it, I guess.
I think we have different levels of passions, or at least I do. I mean, though I love the martial arts, and maybe it's because, you know, music and writing have been with me for much longer in my life, but I more often lose track of time while I'm doing them. And I more often find myself happy after playing, even if it's rubbish, you know, because it's the fact that I'm getting to do something that is so wonderful, and I feel that way about music. Writing has been with me. I've been doing stories since I was like 9, so it's just part of who I am, you know. And music, you know, they introduced it in grade 6 with recorders, and nobody sounded good, but it's okay. It's okay, you know. That's where it started, right? And I did it all through high school, and even did some guitar back then. Yeah, I don't know. It's been such a part of my life, and I only started martial arts more recently, in, you know, the past 11 years or so. So I guess maybe I'm just not there yet. Maybe I haven't cultivated it as much, or maybe I'm just so busy with all the different things I do.
Well, and it's interesting what Nacho was touching on in regards to, you know, being able to share it with somebody else, right? Like being able to feel that through sharing it with somebody else. Because I was just thinking about, I think the times where like I've had a little glimpse of like that joy in martial arts, it's usually been when I'm working with somebody else, and like I can see they're really trying to get something, and then they get it, and I'm like, yes, right? And I'm like so excited with them, for them. It's like a connection of like sharing that with somebody else, right? And like I can say I do feel joy in that. And it's the same within when I'm playing taiko, right? It's like if we're all playing, because taiko is done as a group typically, and so if we're all playing a song and we get through the entire song like all on time with each other, and like everything just went like smoothly, and like at the end of it, on that final beat, we're all just like, yes, yeah. And it's like this shared joy. Everybody feels it, and I don't know. I think there's something to that, where maybe it's easier to allow yourself to get to that place where you can feel joy when it is a shared experience. I don't know. That's an interesting thought, though.
That sounds essentially human.
Congratulations, you're a human being.
Yeah.
On the times I have been when someone has given me a compliment on my technique, usually, you know, I will say, "Oh, thank you very much. I appreciate the kind words and everything." Maybe a little sheepish and stuff, because you know, I'm still not like, "Oh, well, thank you." But on the inside, what I'm thinking, it's not like, "Oh my goodness, I can't believe they said that." Usually, what it is like, "Well, yeah, of course you like that, because I worked on that really, really, really hard. So, you know, I'm glad that that worked. I'm glad that I was able to do that. But it's like, oh yeah, your no-toe is really nice. It's like, yeah, because I worked on that no-toe for a really long time to get that just right. I should say, and I think this is pretty common for a lot of people, is that there's only so much satisfaction that comes from that, because I know that, like, yeah, I worked my ass off. That's why it's good. Like, it's not a mystery. It's not like some mystical talent, or like, oh, really? Like, I'm special? No, it's because I worked really hard at it. That's why it's good. So, and if anything, what that means is that just hearing that makes me go, yes, like, hell yeah, I worked hard at this and it paid off. Shows that I can do that. Shows that I can work really hard at this thing and it will pay off. And that's very inspiring.
Wasn't there a music meme that came out where someone was complimenting a musician saying, oh, like, you're so talented. What's your secret? Practice.
Yeah.
But
I
like,
could totally never do what you do. Practice.
Practice?
See, Joe, I like your approach to that much better than what usually goes on inside my head, because your approach of, that was really good. Well, yeah, I worked on it a lot, so thank you, is far more sensible than my internal monologue that usually goes, oh, I didn't screw it up. Wow.
I didn't suck.
Yeah, basically, yeah. I have, and that's one of the things that I've been working on this entire year, and the fact that we're recording this pretty much on the anniversary of, you know, Alberta's first lockdown, really says something. Yeah. But I've had to work the last year on changing that mentality, or adjusting that mentality of, okay, we can't think of this in terms of, I didn't screw it up. That's not right. What went well, you know? So take the high road. And attitudes like, well, thank you for the compliment. I really worked on it. That makes more sense and plays into what I've actually been working on. So thank you for bringing that point up, because I think it's also important to remind people that, especially this past year, it's been a gong show, and it's too easy to slip into that negative mode of thinking that sucks that essential joy that Erica was talking about out of everything. Mm-hmm. So, yep. Joe, if you think you sounded like a bit of a dickhead, whatever. The point is, you've got a positive view on that I am totally stealing from you after this recording is done.
Sure. And you know what? You can add on to that also, that at the end of the day, you know, if you're thinking, oh, I didn't screw it up, that means in part that you're twisting yourself in knots over approval to whatever authority is there, right? So you also have to say, to some extent, fuck you. And you can say fuck you to them by, oh my God. When you have that practice in, you can go, I don't have to worry about that, because I know what I've done. I know what I've had to do to get this done. Like, there's no insecurity in, you know, this technique, because I've practiced it to death. So there's nothing to worry about. And if somebody else doesn't like it, then I will go like, okay, you know, maybe you have a point, maybe you don't, but I'm not going to get worked up over it, because I know what I had, the work that I put into it. Like, a lot of people will get wigged out because they'll feel guilty about a certain lack of commitment in their training, and then that will, you know, crush them. Yeah, right? So a little bit of that is good, at least as a motivating force. But the point is so that it's not so that you go, oh my God, you're right, terrible. No, it means practice. It means practice so you don't feel like that. So when the situation happens again, you're like, well, I did my best to improve. And if it wasn't good enough, that's okay. That's what I think of this. That's how I translate the samurai, like fatalism, in the sense that, oh, I'm going to go into battle and I'm probably going to die and I'll welcome death. It's the idea that you're so confident in the work that you've put into to get good at what you do, that whatever the outcome is, whatever it is that fate has in store for you, you're ready. You know, if fate's decided like, no, you're going to fall like everyone else, then you go, that's fine, because that's what I've trained for. I've prepared for that. And then if fate says, oh, actually, dun, 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 you're lucky, something special is in store for you, then you go, oh, I'm grateful that that was provided to me, even though I was ready for doom. So, yeah, hopefully that made sense.
It does make sense, but there's one caveat, I guess. Since we're looking at it from the art standpoint, and it happens with the martial arts. So if you go for grading, that's your audience.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So you're training for them in a way, or against them if you follow Taylor Sensei description of grading.
Hi.
You know, because it's not your measure. You're trying to adhere to a standard, and that has the judging part in there.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess it's very human to get frustrated. It's like, oh, I've trained so hard. How come I didn't pass? And this guy that's been training for 6 months passes. You know, I believe that's very, very human, because we have our measure of self-worth and effort, and we can't really see what some other person's inner measure is. And discussing that in the dojo, we came up with a formula, actually. It's like you have understanding, so how much you study something and you are able to process it and get it, basically. You have practice, it's what you do with that, you know, and you add those two, but you multiply by, what's the word I'm looking for? Talent, in a way. Because you have these people that they see something once and they can do it. They have that talent. They can copy something. So with very little understanding and very little practice, they can accomplish the same thing. That's something that someone else that requires a lot of practice to actually translate that understanding, what you were saying about the violin, maybe. So you have that different measure of effort and how much you train and whatever, but once you see it as something as cold as that, it's like, well, he just has different assets to play with this, whatever problem is, you know? So if I have a dull knife, it's going to be harder to cut. Doesn't matter how good I am at cutting or not, you know? So if you use that to abstract yourself from the investment that you have, it can help ease that hurt, I guess, that stress that comes with, oh, I didn't pass, or I wasn't good enough, oh, good, I didn't screw it up. No, it's just you get what you put into it, even if it's talent or practice time, you know.
Yeah.
In addition to that, we all have our good days and our bad days too, right? And sometimes it's clear we're having a bad day to us. We know we've had a shitty day at work or whatever, and sometimes it's not clear to us. Like, we're low energy, we make mistakes, we get in our own heads. Even if you've practiced something, you know, hundreds and hundreds of times, you can still make a mistake, right? You can still make a mistake when you have to only do it once in front of an audience, and you know how to do it, but you still fucked it up. But the audience sees the fuck up; they don't see all the work that you've put into it, and that can be really hard. But you know, there's some aspect of that we can't control, and we just have to accept. And when we accept that we make mistakes all the time, and we can move past them, we can learn from them, I think that will make those kinds of situations easier to understand and to incorporate. Like if you fail grading or something like that, it's a learning opportunity for you, you know, and it sucks, but maybe the ultimate goal isn't just to progress in the ranks, it's to learn something while you're doing it, right? So yeah, I understand being hard on yourself. I have performance anxiety and I'm struggling with that too. To like, I'm my own worst critic kind of stuff. And overcoming that is tough. And yeah, I relate to that. Trying to be positive, trying to always see something as a learning opportunity, no matter what the outcome is, no matter if you screw it up, if you play it so shitty when you're performing in front of somebody, but you know you can do better, it's still an opportunity to learn from that.
Yeah.
One of the things about this that's so important, which is, and I'm totally going to swear because it's I think in this case actually important to swear, is to learn to not give a fuck about what they think. Honestly.
Yeah. Honestly. Right.
Yeah. In both art and in martial arts. If you are somebody who's doing something weird in your artistic realm and everybody says this is crap, there may be the possibility that what you're doing is actually genius, but nobody can recognize it, right? Because you're so far ahead of them that who knows, maybe you have to be dead before people understand what you're doing. So you have to have faith in it. You have to have faith in what you're doing and you have to stand by it. And it shouldn't just be about pleasing the authority or at worst case, pandering to the authority, which is the worst, because then you're a servant of them. It is also about learning to be able to stand up for yourself. And even if you fail that grading, being able to walk away from it being like, well, you know, maybe that was an off day. You know, I screwed something up there. Or maybe I don't have any idea at all why I didn't pass that. But I'm happy with what I did. And maybe my teacher was there and they saw my grading and thought, well, it was pretty good too. And so I can have some satisfaction in that and not get, you know, wrapped up in over, oh my God, why did I fail? Why did they see how great I am? You know, it's, you know, so much of it is also just finding confidence in your own practice at whatever level it is. I mean, that's how I feel these days with my martial arts, is that I'm quite confident in my martial arts. I know that I'm not like a master. I know I'm not super special or any, you know, like not anything exceptional at all. I know where I need to improve, but I'm satisfied with it because I know the work that I've put into and I'm comfortable with that. And so if people don't recognize it, if somebody says like, oh, well, that's wrong, I may listen to what they have to say, and if it's right, then I go, or if it's something that makes sense, if it's clearly something that I haven't been doing, like for instance, say Tei, I don't, you know, for instance, I had a bad habit still of leaving my hands behind me before I go up, and like that's an obvious point of improvement. And I go, oh, yeah, you're totally right. But in other circumstances, just being like, well, this is a matter of interpretation. So if you feel that way, okay. But I'm not going to go, oh my gosh, only I thought of it that way, then I could have passed. So now I have to train that way for an extended period of time. So senpai notices me, like that mentality. Ugh. It'll just make you dependent. It will make you insecure. It won't allow you to experience the joy of the art, truly, because you will be chained by the opinions of other people, and it is the worst. That's the thing that stops artists from being artists more than anything, is other people going, that's dumb, and then them going, oh my God, they think it's dumb. Okay, I won't. I'll do something different. I'll do the cliche pop culture thing because that's what people like. No, you stick to it and you say, I believe in this. This is true. That's the way forward.
I kind of see from what everyone has shared so far that we might give more credit to the monkey brain than the audience when we're judging ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
I think that feels like going to the question of the hardest challenge, because I know that for me it is, because the feeling of being evaluated is not so much of what they're going to think. It's like, am I gonna fuck it up? Comes from that monkey brain, and then you're there and it's like, why do I bother? I still suck at this, and you keep downplaying yourself while you're doing what you enjoy doing. And that's kind of the contradiction there, because I found myself there plenty of times.
You have to samurai pride at the very least. You have to have that sense of dignity about yourself, right? If you're that deferential, then there's a lesson to learn for sure.
You don't show it. The Japanese way is don't lose face. You're there, stoic. Is what's
exactly
going on here.
Oh yeah,
that's a problem,
Oh sure, but it's partly about ritual. The thing about ritual is it's ultimately about forming this, right? You do repetitive patterns so that it makes you understand deeper things. So with that kind of thing, one of the examples being like, you have to you have to cultivate kigurai, I think is the term that they use, or kigurai
for dignity. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the cultivation of that, right? It may be
confidence on your training, basically.
The confidence. Yeah, that's it.
Sure. Yeah, and it's a kind of dignity that you have. Almost certainly to begin with, that you're going to be play acting that, right? Because you're going to be on the inside, oh, I'm nervous. But on the outside, you have to be stoic and strong and ready to go, right? But if you are in enough situations where you're doing that, eventually the inside you is going to gradually find itself identifying with that outer you, and you're no longer playing a role. You've become it.
What you're describing is method acting at its finest.
Gracious, that's a rabbit hole that I can go down. The best Shakespearean actors, Laurence Olivier, for instance, when asked about how the hell, what was his craft, like, he basically said nothing more than just, I memorized the lines, while drunk AF, in the pub after the show, like, oh, how are you so amazing? I remember the lines. And yeah, because whatever it is that's about acting, I think fundamentally it's something about charisma. It's a kind of and this is actually what makes it magical. So there's an intangible charismatic quality to great actors that works in their favor for their art form. It may be that they just have a face, a kind of countenance that draws people in. It could be that there is something about their personality that makes people want to know more. It could be that they have a very natural intuition for empathy. There's all of these things that can contribute to it that have absolutely nothing to do with craft. And there's so many people who learn the craft and still are shit actors because they don't have any of those other things. So much of what is going on there in the so-called craft of it might help them, and that's fine, but often it doesn't do a whole lot more than somebody who simply memorizes the lines and has they can deliver it in a way that rings true. Yeah. Regardless of whether it's realistic or not, because people will often think good acting means realistic, and no, it's not. Realism has nothing to do with good acting at all, not even a tiny bit. If you're being realistic and, I don't know, you're feeling really insecure, so you're sort of mumbling the soliloquy to yourself because you're like, well, this is my internal thoughts, so, this is probably what it would be like. No, you're walking across the front of the stage and going through all this. Oh, this is how I feel. Ah. Or you're in opera and you're singing an aria about how you've been betrayed by your lover, and and all you can do is express, the depth of your rage through the music, and it's not about like, oh well, when this character was a child, they were beaten by their mommy, which made them like this, and God, no. It has everything to do with the fact that your lover betrayed you. What would you do then? You would be pretty damn mad, right? And so, it's about making that aesthetic and making the audience go, "Oh my God, yes, you have been betrayed, and I want you to get your vengeance," or whatever it is that in the story that you're singing about, that you will make blood rain from the sky or whatever, and you want the audience to go, yes, do it. That's what opera is all about.
It's back to that emotional connection too.
Yeah, well, that's what makes it. Oh, opera in particular, because of it's an Italian art form, and the emotion is so important, and it's something that's so lost when people are seeing like pretty technically pure things, and it'll sound nice, but there's nothing being conveyed dramatically. And then when you listen to the old recordings of the singers who really got that, they like make you go, ah, like you when they're finished singing an aria, and you've heard their voice cracking, you hear them go, ah, story, ah, like making ugly noises to express their pain. And then they did have their great cadence in the end, and you can hear the audience just go, ah, like everybody just rises in a wave and goes, ah, and they wouldn't do that if they didn't feel it generally, and you hardly ever feel that today, because it's just conservatory students singing technically perfect things and elderly people going, what time is it? Is it over yet? And no offense to the elderly, I think the elderly should have way better than that. Elderly people should be like blasted back by how awesome opera is.
As far as inspiration goes for me, I would have to say that Stephen King inspires me a lot. Not just as a writer, though of course he's fantastic, but he's also lived a varied life. He's been in bands and all kinds of things. I like that, because a lot of people will say that you have to have just one passion to be good, but obviously he makes that not true. There are tons of people in my life, including my sensei, Erica, who inspire me regularly. But if I had to pick one, it would be Stephen King.
But that's an awesome choice. And also because of the fact that he was out of his mind on drugs and alcohol in the 80s.
Oh,
and he got through that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, seriously, like that's your wine.
Yeah.
Say cheers. To get through that. And also he was hit by a car, right?
Jeez.
He's been through so much, and he's even, and he's one of those people that, he really advocates exploring a lot. Like, even, when you're reading, don't just read just the genre you want to write in. Read everything, because you draw everything. You draw inspiration from everything in life, not just by staying this narrow path.
Yeah.
We've been focusing on how we show our arts to an audience that's present. So since you guys are writers, and also photography could fall in that category, how does that translate? The fact that your audience is not there in front of you, how does that translate to how you perform your art in a way? I kind of paraphrased there because I forgot the exact question. But
so, Ryan, would you like to go first?
Sure. I mean, first off, it depends on what type of writing you're doing. Every type has a different style. So, if you are doing like a documentary, it could be scripted, it could be not scripted. So things will go different that way. You might just be sort of telling the story after the fact. I took screenwriting, and one of the things we did was get to work, do a workshop with someone from Survivor. And, you know, that show is basically put together like a video collage. You know, they kind of craft the story as they go. So that's a totally different look. As far as like novel writing, you know, you have to decide what point of view you're taking. You have to decide if it's past or present, or there's a lot of things there. And then, you know, I also do screenplays, and they're always in the present. So that's a whole other thing too. As far as trying to get people to visualize, you know, and interact with it, it's part of it is just trying to figure out how much description to do. You can go overboard and bore someone to death talking about something for 6 chapters and never getting to any action is something that I don't personally like to do. But, you know, I do see that a lot, especially in sci-fi, where, you know, people will get into the world building so much that they're, you know, so focused on describing a ship or something.
I fucking hate that. I hate that. I hate it so much. Give me story, and then you can give me that info. If you've got the story, then I go, okay, I'm along. I'm on board. And then you can talk about the stupid ship, and then maybe I'll think it's interesting. But you don't start with that. No one wants that. Hey, sorry.
I agree. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, you know, usually you want to get to hooking someone, and this goes back to what we were talking about earlier, but the people aspect. You know, who's in the story and why do we care? Why do we care what they're going through? If you don't introduce them in the right way, you know, if you get too deep into their problem without giving the audience a reason to care about them, you know, that's a way that they won't, you know, you won't get the interaction you're looking for, or the caring from the audience too. So
you're totally right. Those are things that are too often forgotten, and it's so annoying, especially in genre writing, because that's the thing that blocks people from it. People don't pay attention to sci-fi or fantasy because they start off with, well, the elves, the Gulbungi elves came from the trees of Bingzingaboo, and no one cares. You've got to give something to your audience, right?
You got to care.
Yes, exactly. Give them something to come on in, and here's some chocolate. And they go, ooh. And then you're like, let me tell you about the elves. And then they're like, oh, okay, tell me about your elves. This chocolate's good. And that's good storytelling, especially in stuff like sci-fi or fantasy, where world building is really easy to do in a book because you can just write it all out, but in other media, it's very painful.
Which brings up the point that I want to make on this one. First, I'm going to say the potentially unpopular thing. That is why I could not get into any of Tolkien's work. I could not get through, you know, half a chapter describing a tree.
It took so long to get into that book.
I didn't find The Hobbit was bad for that, though. I do get what you're saying with the Lord of the Rings. So.
Yeah,
the Hobbit is the vanilla description. Yeah.
But he pretty much invented most of the genre. So
yeah. So there's some slack for that.
For the real sadists. Yeah.
Masochists,
rather.
But the whole idea of the fishing motion I made, which was the whole concept of the hook, line, and sinker, without an audience immediately present when I'm writing creative fiction, I have to set up the hook, line, and sinker. I have to hook whoever is going to be my target audience. So in this case, if we go back to the superhero fiction that I self-published. That is for the superhero fanboys. Great. What I have to do is I have to set up in the first chapter, in the character introductions, in the setting introductions, enough of a hook to lure them in and then sink them into the story by developing the characters and expanding the world. And that has to be done in a measured and calculated pace. Otherwise, you're going to end up with things like wasting a chapter on, describing a location or a piece of technology or a character's costume in such a way that it just becomes irrelevant and nonsensical. Where at the same time, you have to provide enough detail to want them to come back the next month when I publish the next chapter and keep going and keep reading and build that engagement. That's where the Ha Kyu of storytelling comes in. Bringing it back around to that point. The build up to a point, and then the build up to the next point. So without an audience there, I have to sit down and map out how I'm going to do that. And that takes the form of what each character arc is going to be, what each miniature story arc is going to look like, where I can build up to that, ramp up to that speed. The big event happens, and then the fallout is where I plant the seeds for the next hook to bring everybody back in for the next round. As far as the photography goes, it's simultaneously easier and more difficult, because if I'm shooting a specific person, place, event, there's a specific theme that I'm working on. That means the audience is already set. The people who are going to be looking at this are the people who are already engaged in and want me to be there to shoot what I shoot. When I'm just doing, artistic photography, where I'm wandering around with a camera and just shooting whatever that I find aesthetically interesting at the moment, I don't care who my audience is. My audience is going to be whoever stumbles across this with the necessary hashtags on Instagram or Facebook or wherever I post it and go, oh, that's neat, click, like, whatever. So the audience in that case is actually secondary. The primary purpose of the artistic photography is I see something that catches my eye and I want to share it with whoever wants to experience it. So I'm not going out to look for and bring in people. I'm not catering to an audience that way. I'm just making it available for whoever can appreciate it. But if I'm doing, like I said, a specific project, then the audience is already preset. They already have their expectations. I'm working to their expectations. Therefore, I am trying to present, what's expected.
Given what you both said, couldn't you just translate that mindset of sending your art and your performance out there to the martial arts and the music? Because you talk about having a captive audience in one scenario with the photography, and having a audience that shares the interest in case of the random, like the artistic photography or you're putting out a written work. And when you were describing your process, I was thinking kata. Because if you don't sell the first kamae, you lose your partner first, and you're not going to engage the audience. Like we've all been there when you go like Chudan no kamae and your partner's just standing. And okay, it's supposed to be Sune no kamae, but you're supposed to engage somehow. And if they don't, there's nothing there, So don't you think it could translate and kind of help you with in the case of Steve, with the shortcomings that he says to have when performing kata or something else?
No, that is an excellent point. It's kind of been brewing in the back of my mind for a while, at the very least since, and you'll catch this reference, December 2018, Toronto, where my Sandan grading was blown because I could not maintain that focus and that presence to get the Bee Gees the fuck out of my head. Because I hate disco and I fucking hate the Bee Gees and I fucking hate Staying Alive. Because, damn it. So that blew my focus and concentration. So what would have been ideal was to take a similar approach to what I do for my artistic photography of, I'm just going to produce the content that I'm going to produce in this exact moment when it's captured, and the audience can find it, they can like it, they can share with it, they can ignore it, they can do whatever the hell they want with it. And that's that. That is the mindset that should have been there, but wasn't. Because I often find myself, especially in a grading situation, especially in an MBOO situation, even when we're doing public demos, not necessarily a grading, but just, the club open house, for example, where I'm trying to, set the stage for new interest. I end up so focused on, and Joe brought up this point earlier, what everybody else is thinking, what everybody else could be thinking, and that's the rabbit hole I tend to fall down is, what could they be thinking? I get so focused on that I forget, or it doesn't occur to me in the moment, to just capture the moment, present the art as I see it, as I experience it, and let the audience deal with it. So thank you for reiterating that point, because it is a recurring point that I personally am working on and will continue to work on. So excellent point, Nacho. Thank you.
This has me thinking about not so much music performance, but the music arranging and the composing that I've done. Usually those are done for the arrangements are for a specific student. So in terms of what I'm thinking of, it's just what can that student do? What's in their realm of, what's in their technical box? But the sappy love theme that I did for a movie, I was not thinking about audience at all. I was just trying to match sound-wise what was happening on the screen, and figured if I could capture that clearly enough, then hopefully the audience would like it, but I wasn't really thinking of them at all.
Yeah, I just realized that it goes back to what Joe was saying as well, that we should be able to let go of our performance when it's done. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And in a way, when I'm posting a picture, I'm letting go of that performance because I can't stop it now. Yeah. Whatever it is, it is. And
you've sent it off into the wilds of the internet, and there it be.
And if we're willing to do that with a picture, how come we can't show a kata in front of 5 dudes?
Whereas you have to learn to just move on from that kind of thing. You have to be able to not put so much into everything that if something doesn't go quite perfectly, you go, oh my God, it didn't turn out exactly the way I wanted it to be.
The world is ending.
Yeah.
Just, I don't know. Read about some Buddhism.
Yeah, and following the same train of thought, now that I think more about it, and I'm going to try to get a different question there as well. Because there's the performing art, the kata, the performing music, and there's the art on the wild, the recorded music or the photography, the writing. But there are some things that kind of fall in the middle. For example, thinking about calligraphy for Erika as a question. Because usually it's not something that you would send out, but it's something that you would show someone after the fact. It's like, I did this. And someone would see it, and you would be in front of your audience, but you're not performing. You're kind of defending, in a way. It could be with photography as well. It's like, oh yeah, these are my pictures, It's like, where do you take that? And it's like, you kind of go on that. And what's your view there? How can we steal things from one way of performing and using them on the other ways?
I think with different visual arts, whether it's calligraphy or painting or drawing, I mean, you can also easily make a performance out of it, right? And make it a performing art. And I've seen that done, and it's captivating equally, right? I think what happens is that there tends to be more for things like visual arts and maybe photography too, where it becomes a little bit more of like a personal and private thing that we need our own kind of privacy to create, maybe, you know. And I think maybe that's how it's a little bit different than performing arts. But that being said, you can easily cross over into making it a performing art.
Yeah, I need to like lock myself up in a room and not have outside stimulation, because it's the only way I will trust myself to actually dive down into some good ideas.
Yeah. So Joyce was asking, what kind of brushes and pens do you use for calligraphy?
So I have my little brush, my brushes. Yep, here we go.
Yeah.
I have my brushes here. So for shodo, which is Japanese calligraphy, we don't normally use pens unless you're like kind of writing a card or something. So we normally use brushes, right? So, oh, there's my camera.
There.
So these are typically made from different animal hair. So some are goat, some are horse. Depending on the softness, you'll be able to tell kind of what the animal is. This one I think is my favorite. It's a feather. So this one was actually made by an artist here in Ontario. So this is not a traditional thing, just so everybody knows. This is not traditional, and I think this is why I love it so much. Using a feather to do calligraphy really changes the ending result of your technique. So you get to play around with it and rediscover it anew. Even though you're doing the exact same thing, when you use a different medium, it changes everything. So and I think that's always a very interesting way to try to challenge yourself. So if I kind of bring that back in towards like martial arts or music, you know, in martial arts, if we just switch up our weapon to, like, if we're a sword person and we switch up the length of the weapon, you know, we could be doing the exact same thing, but we get to learn new things from it, right? Or like if you switch out the sword for a stick, and, you know, again, it's like you use that differently. So you might be doing a similar type of technique, but all of a sudden you're going to learn it very differently, and you're going to learn how to manipulate your tool in a different way. So that's the interesting thing with using different brushes in calligraphy too, and so another common thread that ties back into martial arts with any kind of art, you know, there's these things where you start to learn that, you know, if you can change things ever so subtly, but it teaches you all these new lessons in the process, because you have to adapt, you have to, you know, learn how to adjust to this new tool or this new medium or whatever it is, and all the things that come along with that. So it's a good challenge, and I encourage everybody that does any kind of art to continue to challenge yourself by switching it up a little bit.
The rolled up newspaper.
Yep. Rolled up newspaper.
Yeah. We've had to go through that training indoors.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
Shorter weapon.
Yeah.
Made by
Shepherd Sensei's dowel with the pool noodle last weekend.
Yeah.
You know what's going to be a next level Zoom class for you, Erica, is Shodo over Zoom.
Ooh. Where I get these brushes, a little bit more niche. You can't get them at regular, like all regular paint stores. Some of them you can, but not all of them. So I think I've seen them sold at Desserts, which is like a paint supply store. Every so often you can find them at a Wallach's. I don't know if you guys have them in Calgary or if it's an Ottawa-based art chain. But mostly, to tell you the truth, I go to either Chinatown, where they have many different kind of markets that have different wares, or there's one particular Asian Japanese shop here in Ottawa called the East Wind, and they carry a lot of calligraphy tools.
A lot of craft teachers here in Chile have taken the approach of including the starter pack with the classes. So it's okay, you want to join. I understand that is not easy. This is the bare minimum you need to begin. So with your first class, that is going to be a bit more expensive. You get this, and then you can continue. And it's actually proven pretty like successful. It's because you said this, Erika, in the learning music as an adult meet, that since you've invested on it, it's your money, you paid for it, so you want to stick with it. You kind of make the extra effort because you're committed to the. So that could be a way of, I don't know, helping bring more students to something that traditionally you couldn't do online.
Yeah, very true, very true. This is actually something that I would like to incorporate into our actual martial arts group is the calligraphy aspect of it, because I have found so much value kind of in cross training in learning how to use the brush in regards to learning how to use a sword. So
that's where you understand the relaxation of the hand on like earnestly.
And it's the whole, so this was one of the threads I wanted to touch on really earlier, was the whole, like, all of these arts teach us awareness, okay? Different levels and different areas of awareness, whether it's like awareness of our body, awareness of like the connection between touch and like if I'm thinking about playing an instrument, you learn different levels of touch, right? And how to feel different things in touch or through touch, right? If I think about that same concept with a brush, you get, and with a sword, you almost feel what is on the other end of your tool from your hand, right? This is your hand, this is your tool, the paper is here, I can feel what is happening on the paper in my hand, right? And so this is what I mean. And it's kind of similar with a sword, where it's like you're holding a sword, but you can feel what is happening with the other sword that your sword is touching in your hand, right? So you develop these sensitivities and the ability to feel and this awareness of different parts of you and the thing you are working with.
It's like the space between proprioception and spatial awareness. It's like there's something in there.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So I think, again, I just think that, cross-training and all these different things, it doesn't just have to be, martial arts, different martial arts, like learn music, learn some kind of visual art, learn, I don't know, just try different things and you will start to see these common threads that connect everything, these common functions that just make everything work. I just find it fascinating. The more you try to do, the more things you actually experiment with, you start to see the interconnections between everything.
I'm just, I'm practicing, I'm focusing on my technique on guitar, like really getting into the details. So that's really, as you said before, private, self-focused, and I'm my own audience. I'm doing it for myself. So that's, what I'm working on.
Right now, as far as writing goes, I'm working on a novel. I completed it a while ago, and I'm just doing a last edit before I get to an editor.
Wow.
And other than that, I'm planning to get a store together soon for my site so that I can sell things like the anthologies I've been published in on there, and maybe some crafty things. We'll see. Yeah, that's about what I got going on.
So yet more connections being made. So I've started to get into leatherwork and making various things, and trying to kind of build a business in that. To, as the last year has shown, retail is not very reliable for for income. So yeah, so trying to find things where you can support yourself and kind of work for yourself. And anyway, leatherwork as a craft has been also very fascinating. So and again, the little threads that are kind of connecting things, and the attention to detail that martial arts helped me learn is translating well into that. So so yeah, so always new projects on the go, new various kind of bags and martial arts supplies like Suba, and my Fukuro Shinai I continue with. So I'm now offering that more on a wider scale to people. And yeah, so I'll just continue with that. In terms of martial arts, just kind of trying to get back into the dojo and getting the club running together in person again is going to be a big challenge. So that's my next challenge.
Well, right now it's just trying to keep Iaido practices going on Zoom. That's the big thing that that I'm concentrating on, and I'm so grateful for Kamusukai's help with getting everything set up and the cross training opportunities, and making sure that we actually have an Iaido community that's able to function during the pandemic. Musically, I'm back to basics. Scales, modes, basic patterns, relearning, redrilling the basics over and over again, because it's what I need to do right now. I've got a couple of ideas in mind for some photography projects that I'd like to start sometime this year. Last year was a dead zone for creativity, so I hadn't been able to produce anything either for my enjoyment, my own practice, or my own or for any real public facing work, aside from random pictures of my dog, but whatever. And as far as literature goes and writing, I haven't had any really solid writing projects that I've been working on. However, when I was writing for Edmonton Culture Magazine and the Pulp Press, my editor there, Cheryl Cottrell Smith, is she's in the cosplay community and the online gaming community, and she's currently writing a book on how women in the gaming and cosplay and online and nerd culture communities are treated, and the types of challenges that face women in nerd culture, really. So when that comes up, I'll post more details. But for now, I'd give my former editor a shout out, because us Edmontonians got to stick together and support each other, especially times like this, right?
For sure. And that'll be a good read, or an important read when it comes out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Nacho, anything to share, to promote?
I've been actually trying to document the things that I do for myself, like the new desk, for example, that it was basically chopping up dining room table in half to make a proper computer desk and not the flimsy bench I had before. And trying to put that out there too. I miss the common enjoyment aspect that I mentioned at some point. And that's why I talked to Steve. And I could, now that we're all here, like leave it out there. So whoever wants to contribute,
I'm just trying to think if there's anything we need to plug. I mean, we're still, club-wise, we will have to start thinking about, you know, planning that return to the dojo. Thank you everyone for tuning in. If this is your first time on the channel, do check out some of the other videos. Don't forget to hit the like button, drop a comment, hit the subscribe button, the notification bell. It'll help the channel and it'll help the YouTube algorithm show you what you want to see. And tune in next month. I'll be chatting with some collaborative pianists. And then the month after that will be university music students. So look forward to that and stay well and catch you next time. So